The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod. We're coming to you live from the Warner Center in Woodland Hills, California. This is the home for Autism Live, and it is the home for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. We want to start today's show with sending our heartfelt support and condolences to our family, extended family on the YouTube campus. These shootings that happen on a regular basis, for those of you who didn't hear, there was a shooting on the YouTube campus yesterday. And I just want to say, you hear these things and it's so upsetting. This feels so close to home because we could not do our show without the support of YouTube. YouTube has been in our corner since minute one. They've helped us to grow our audience and have helped us in many different ways. And so our thoughts and our concerns are with them. We continue to have more and more of these shootings, and it just, it takes your breath away. I don't know about the rest of you, but it feels like it keeps getting closer and closer to home, and it's scary, so very scary. I want everybody to, turn your thoughts to the folks who were there and doing their jobs, and several who were injured. Thank goodness, no loss of life except for the shooter at this point, and let's hope that it stays that way. So again, our thoughts, feelings, concerns go to our friends at YouTube. And let's hope that we can all together do something to stem the tide of these shootings. It's just, I'm never speechless. I'm speechless. Turning now, though, to our show, because we have a big show for you. It is April, and April is a month in which the autism community raises some of the surrounding cushion that we have and asks the rest of the world to take a look and to not turn away. For some people, that's autism awareness. For some, it's autism inclusion. For some, it's autism acceptance. It really depends on your circumstances and what your word is. But we here at Autism Live want for all of those things. And we did a big show on Monday that is available for you to watch. We had some incredible guests that were here. We know that the UN is going to be commemorating World Autism Awareness Day on the UN floor tomorrow. We already read the speech from the Surgeon General. It's not the Surgeon General, it's the Secretary General. There we go. And the focus for this year for the UN is on not just it always is providing resources and support and dignity to individuals with different abilities. But this year, the particular focus is looking at how women and girls are affected on the autism spectrum, which just is, I think it's high time that was everybody's focus. So we had a panel of amazing women on the show on Monday. I've been saying we had amazing, empowering autism women and Matt Asner, which, somebody was saying we need to start a band, Matt Asner and the Amazing Autism Women. And I know that Matt's an incredible singer. For those of you who don't know, Matt is an incredible singer. So he could handle that. I know that he could. In any case, we continue on today, and for this entire month, we're trying to bring you a variety of stories to inform you, to uplift you, to give you the hope that you need to continue on. Our show is meant for the entire autism community. That means everybody who is on the autism spectrum, people who think they might be on the autism spectrum and have not yet been diagnosed, and everybody who cares about them. If you're a parent, teacher, practitioner, we know that you are included in this community, at least on our show. So we try to be interactive. Samantha's going to show you some of the different ways that you can participate with us as we continue on giving you lots of information this week. I want to remind you that our homepage is autism-live.com. When you go there, so many things to do. The first one, though, is click on the triangle that's on the computer screen. That will start either the live show or the most recently recorded live show. To the side of all that is something we call the live feature. You can put your cursor in the box that says your question, and all you have to do is type and hit enter. You won't be asked to log in. You won't be asked for a username or a password or your email or to verify that you're a person and not a bot. You certainly aren't asked for a credit card. None of those things. We don't know who you are. You have complete anonymity. I like that about our live feature. I will say that I think there's something about posting on Facebook and YouTube that's a little bit more immediate because other people can see it, but other people can see it. So if you want anonymity, write in on our channel Autism-Live. Now, if in the different formats that we've given you, you feel that it's not private enough and that it doesn't give you, because it limits the number of characters you can put on our, you can fill out a second one, but it does limit the number of characters. You can write to me, and my email is s.penrod@autism-live.com. You can shoot me an email, and that's another way that you can communicate with us, because we love to hear from you. It is the most exciting part of our day when we have a chance to interact with you. Now, on Wednesdays, normally we have Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh live, and as you know, if you were watching last week's show, she had said that she wasn't going to be able to be with us today, but she asked specifically because a lot of questions came in about the DSM-5 and about an actual diagnosis. She had filmed something with us a couple of years ago, right when the DSM-5 was coming out, and so she asked if we would show that. We're about to show that. That's about 42 minutes, and then we'll be back with you live. You can be writing in questions during the taped segment. That's perfectly okay. But that's the only segment that we won't be live today. When we come back live, Nancy Allspaw-Jackson will be joining us for Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. And our special guest today is Natasha Barber. And she is a mother, an author, and she started an organization called Autism Moms Know Safety. So she's going to talk with us about safety and how we can teach our kids things about safety, because that's first, right? What else is more important than safety and keeping our kids safe, healthy, and alive, right? Then we talk about everything else, and it's important. I think most of us have been through some sort of a safety scare with our kiddos on the autism spectrum. I know I had them when he was younger. So super important that we inform ourselves, take certain steps, and help to be teaching our kids about what to do and what not to do, and making it reinforcing for them to do the things that they should. So we'll talk with her about that. Plus, we have a bunch of news, and some of it is just really innovative and exciting. So I know that you're absolutely going to love it. But first, we're going to go to that recording of Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh talking about the DSM-5, what it says, what it doesn't say, what it means, what it doesn't mean. And then we'll be back live with the rest of our show. So stick with us. Here's Ask Dr. Doreen.
So first of all, the name of the disorder has changed, and the name is now autism spectrum disorder. Okay. In the past, it used to be autistic disorder. Up to this point, there were essentially 3 different or 5 different diagnoses that were placed under the spectrum.
Okay.
So actually, the way that it is currently is that the chapter heading was pervasive developmental disorders. Essentially, that means disorders that are, cause delays or problems in more than one area. They're pervasive. And the three main ones that we were dealing with were autistic disorder, and then Asperger's disorder, and then pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified.
Right.
And so now with the new DSM, everything has been merged, and it is now called autism spectrum disorder, one name.
Okay.
So what you have on the screen, I think, is basically going through the first portion. You'll see autistic disorder, and with autistic disorder, or what we call autism, there had to be a total of 6 or more symptoms. The symptoms would have had to been evident before the age of 3. And just very quickly, kind of the symptoms were in the areas of social deficit, communication deficits, and what we call stereotypic repetitive behaviors. And I've given a few examples of what would be considered a social deficit. For instance, if the child doesn't have eye contact, or the child doesn't share or show. And that's, in behavioral terminology, that's called tacting. Tacting means, you know how you've seen little kids and they will just sort of make an art thing project and then just come to mom or dad and show it. Yeah. And that is, or like if they're in the car, for instance, and they'll see, a fire engine, and they'll be like, fire engine or truck or whatever, and all they're doing is showing it or sharing minds, essentially. And that's a very important feature or symptom, because it's the very first example, or not really the first, but the very most obvious early example of joint attention. So that means the child who shows you something already has the understanding that your mind and that his mind are separate minds. Yeah. And so you don't know what I'm thinking about, but here it is, I kind of want to show this to you, or there it is, I want you to see that. And that's kind of like join your mind with mine. Look at what I'm looking at. And that is the, I guess, first most obvious sign of joint attention or perspective taking theory of mind. So that's a very important key feature. So if a child is not doing that, that's a red flag. Okay. And then, of course, emotional reciprocity is another key feature of the social deficit. But, these are children who don't really react if they're hurt, or if they need comfort, or if they see another person hurt, or that sort of thing. Now, in the social deficit area, you do need 2 symptoms. This is the current status. You need to have 2 at least in that area.
You could have more, but in order to qualify, you have to have at least 2.
At least 2, correct. In communication deficits, the areas that we look at are language, obviously, and that's the most common. Most of the kids that I see come in because they have a delay in language. And then pretend play is considered a communication, or up to this point, considered a communication deficit. So the child is not really doing any pretend play. And pretend play has to do with using sort of imaginary objects to perform various things. Like an early sign of that would be picking up a toy telephone, let's say. Right. Yeah. That's symbolic play.
So a bit of imagination.
Imagination, right, or dressing up, or, all those things are imagination, pretend play. And then, of course, there's, even with kids who have adequate language, or we should say speech, they don't have the ability to converse. Right. Okay, so any of those are examples of communication deficits. We need at least one symptom in that area. Okay. And finally, the last section is stereotypic and repetitive behaviors, which we also refer to as self-stimulatory behaviors, or stereotypy. And these could be a different, million different things. I listed a few, sort of having routines that are difficult to break. Things have to be a certain way. Preoccupation, you've seen a lot of kids like preoccupied with one aspect of something. Intense focus on one thing where you can't really break the child off of that. Or motor behaviors that are repetitive, like hand flapping or body rocking. And these have all been classic, over time, classified under one heading, which is the stereotypic repetitive behaviors. These are behaviors that don't have necessarily a function, or people don't understand why the child is doing this other than some intrinsic reason that we don't know. And so if you have 2 in the social deficit area and 1 in communication, 1 in stereotypic repetitive behaviors, that's just 4.
Right.
And you need a total of 6.
Okay.
So 2 additional symptoms in one of these 3 areas. And as I said, they all have to have become evident before the age of 3.
Right.
And if you have 6 symptoms, then you have a diagnosis of autistic disorder. That's the current process. Okay?
And so this is part of the reason why 2 children with autism could look so vastly different.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because somebody could have 5 from communication and 2 from social and 1 from repetitive, and they qualify for an autism diagnosis, but somebody else could have 2 from the social.
That's right.
8 from the repetitive.
That's right.
And 1 from language, and they still
right.
have the same diagnosis.
Absolutely. And also, each of the symptoms that a child might have might be slightly deficient or extremely.
Right.
So in other words, a child might have delays in language, but they're not as severe as another child who has
Right.
very significant delays. And up to
Right.
this point, you're not really scoring them on a sort of qualitative measure. It's just, do they have a delay or not?
Right.
So yeah, that is exactly why there are so many different kids, and they all kind of fit under this thing. And it's actually interesting that you say that, because I think the goal for DSM-4 was to help sort of subdivide the kids.
Right.
And that's why they had the different diagnoses. They had the autistic disorder, which is the one we went through.
Right.
And then they had Asperger's and PDD-NOS, which we're going to go through now.
Okay, great.
So Asperger's, and this is all current stuff, DSM-4, required that you would have 2 in the area of social deficits, again, like autism, and that you would have 1 in the sort of stereotypical repetitive behavior area and none in the communication deficit area.
Okay.
And so this would separate, the intention was that this would separate those kids out who have appropriate language skills or communication skills, but they still have some, delays or deficits in social behavior, and oftentimes they would also have some kind of adherence to routines or those types. And that's what we would classify as Asperger's. I never really liked the Asperger's diagnosis ever. It just didn't really fit the kids.
Right.
And the reason for that is that I think Asperger's children right now, the concept is that they don't have any language delay. And I think that kids with Asperger's do have a delay in social language, sort of pragmatic language, a very advanced abstract language. But, so this was how you diagnose Asperger's, essentially, is that you weren't really looking at communication, you were looking more at social behavior.
And one of the things I've heard from parents that they felt was unjust about the Asperger diagnosis is that people tended to generalize and say, oh, it's a lesser version of autism. I think a lot of us look at it that way, and yet there's the possibility that there's somebody whose deficits in those areas are so extreme that it's a very, profound form of autism, but it's just different areas.
I wouldn't, if you're diagnosing correctly, at any point that you place an individual with Asperger's and an individual with autism or autistic disorder next to each other, the child with autistic disorder is always going to be more severe and profound. But what happens, which was kind of unfair for the families who have children with Asperger's, was that the deficits in Asperger's don't appear until a little bit later. So for instance, one of the things that we're looking at for 2- and 3-year-old, 4-year-old is mostly communication.
Yeah.
And because these children, Asperger's kids, tend to be very intelligent, they kind of overcompensate for the social delays. The social delays don't become really all that evident until maybe 5, 6. So often the Asperger's kids are diagnosed later.
Yeah.
And also, up till now, there hasn't been good funding for Asperger's, whereas, in the California, for instance, regional center system, you don't get any funding from the regional centers if you have a diagnosis of Asperger's, whereas you do if you have a diagnosis of autism.
Yeah.
So, and so basically it was a difficult situation. My Asperger's kids are the ones that I worry about the most, actually, because because of the fact that the assumption is they're higher functioning, they don't get the level of support they should.
Okay, good
So
point.
that's one of the reasons I'm happy about the new changes, and you'll see, because it kind of just folds Asperger's into the whole spectrum.
Okay. And then we're left with PDD-NOS.
PDD-NOS, which stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder Not Otherwise Specified.
You know what parents say it stands for, though?
No.
They say pediatrician didn't diagnose.
Oh,
but
that's
what
great.
PDD stands for.
That's perfect. I didn't know. I've never heard that.
And then there's something for the NOS as well, but I think it's not something we can say on TV.
Yeah. I just think it's nonsense. It's like, and we have this in mental disorders. You have it, it's not just with autism, but you have it across a few other disorders as well, where it's kind of like the catch-all category.
Yep.
It's like, okay, this is the child who has not 6 symptoms, but 5.
Right.
Okay, where do I put him?
Right.
He definitely has 5 deficits or 4 deficits that have to be dealt with. So we put him in the PDD-NOS category and say, okay, that means he's higher functioning. He's less delayed, or he has fewer symptoms to deal with.
Right.
And so, and that was, the kids with PDD-NOS, I think, were completely treated unfairly, because everyone kind of expected these kids to just do fine.
Right.
I mean, I had over the years, many situations where I had to go to court for kids, or really argue the fact that they needed services despite their PDD-NOS diagnosis.
Because funding sources frequently go, so you have maybe 5, not the 6, and or maybe 2 of them aren't from the one area that they need to be from social.
Exactly.
So you could actually have 7, but if they weren't 2 from the social, you don't fit the diagnosis. So there you are with the pediatrician saying to you, oh, your child has deficits, good luck with that, there's no funding.
Exactly.
Horrifying.
For instance, I would have a child where they would have every single stereotypic behavior that could exist, and delays in communication, and because they had just one symptom is the social, which would be just aberrant social behavior, and you'd look at that child and say, oh my gosh, he's more severe, and I can't diagnose him. So these were some of the problems that we had.
Hopefully addressed in the DSM-5.
Yes, hopefully addressed now. I think they will be, actually. I like it. As I've said before, we'll see how it impacts society, but I do like the new criteria.
So we're going to delve into the DSM-5 now. I think we should take a short break.
Okay.
We'll let you take a drink and let you guys ask questions about anything that we've discussed so far, and then we'll continue on with Dr. Doreen Crampichet breaking down the new DSM-5 autism criteria. Stick with us. Welcome back to Autism Live and Ask Dr. Doreen. We have with us in the studio right now Dr. Doreen Crampichet, truly a visionary in the field of autism, and I would argue the greatest autism expert.
Thank you.
I mean, you have the experience and have had you don't look like you could possibly be old enough to have had the experience that you have, but you have. And working with children and really being at the forefront of getting help, both clinically, but also making sure that the legislation happens that will help the families.
Oh yeah, things have improved quite a bit since I started. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been my puzzle my whole life. Like, I've been trying to figure it out my whole life. So the more we know, the better, of course.
Well, and it helps me to sleep at night to know that great minds like yourself are working on this, because working on, and you always take into consideration, how do we get this to the family? How do we trickle this down to the family? Because they're the important part of this. I always hear you saying that, and I appreciate that greatly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And so today we're talking about the DSM-5.
DSM-5.
We just went through the DSM-4 and talked about what the current status is, and now you're going to start to tell us what some of the differences are.
Right. So what we'll do is we'll talk first about, because it's quite different.
Okay.
So we're going to start with just like a definition of the DSM-5 criteria now, and then we'll just sort of target the differences.
Okay.
So first of all, as I said, it's called autism spectrum disorder now, which I'm glad, because for many years people were just referring to ASD, and that wasn't a term that even existed.
Funny.
Even the chapter wasn't called ASD, and I was like, where are people getting this from? So
yeah, it sort of became the PC term, because there was such the battle between, is the child autistic or does the child have autism?
Right.
And different people feel different ways about it, so everybody started saying ASD.
Right.
Because nobody could argue with that.
Right.
But so now it flows with it.
Now it flows with it, and so it starts with the first criteria, I guess, which they call criterion A, And this, there's a lot of text on the screen here, but basically this is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across contexts, and it can't be accounted for by general developmental delays, and manifested by all three of the following.
Okay.
So there's two things here. One is we're no longer saying you have to have like X number of the following. We're saying you have to have all of the ones that are listed on this page. And the purpose for this is that they've joined communication and social. Now, I've said for years and years, obviously, how can you not have a social delay if you have a communication delay?
Right.
There's almost no way, right? I mean, when you have a communication delay, unless you're hearing impaired, you will have a social delay.
Right.
And that's what happens. I mean, how can you socialize if you can't vocalize or communicate?
Right, makes sense.
So it makes a lot of sense that they've joined it. So the very first thing is they've joined communication and social, and these are the things they want you to have. The deficits in social emotional reciprocity, we had that. That was kind of the empathy portion, which ranges from abnormal social approach and failure of normal back and forth conversation. So that's kind of through reduced sharing of interests, emotions, and affect, and response to total lack of initiation of social interactions. So that basically says the whole array, if you have a mild social deficit or if you have a very significant social deficit, that's number one. You got it. That you have that point. But you also have to have deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors like used for social interaction. Things like poor integration of verbal and nonverbal communication. This is kind of like, standing very, very close to people and talking to them, not giving eye contact, through
gesturing.
abnormalities in eye contact, gestures, understanding gestures, exactly, body language as a whole, or deficits in understanding and the use of nonverbal communication, all the way to a lack of facial expression or gesture. So that means sort of doesn't matter how severe, but if you are not able to have those, if you don't have those nonverbal communicative behaviors, whether they're mild or severe, then you classify. That'll be point 2. You have that.
Okay.
Third area is deficits in developing and maintaining relationships appropriate to developmental level, ranging from all the way from difficulties adjusting behavior to suit the different social contexts, all the way through difficulties in sharing imaginative play, making friends to an apparent absence of interest in people. So this is, again, is a sort of a broad array. So it's kind of like, oh, I have a hard time making friends, or I just have absolute isolation, no contact at all with people.
Right.
And so for us, as people who've been diagnosing, these are not new words. These are all old words. They were a part of the diagnosis before, but they weren't merged.
Okay.
What's happened now is they've merged it, and they've said, so you must have all 3 of these. Okay, so now let's look at what they are. That
Can I
means,
ask one thing,
sure.
though? Because what's initially scary to me as a parent is, oh, you have to have all 3 of these, but within those 3, they give you such a broad target, and you just have to have one thing within that broad target, correct?
That's right.
Okay, great.
And if you really think about it, Shannon, these 3 are the ones that most of the kids would have before anyway, because remember we used to have 2 in the social area?
Right.
And at least 1 in the communication area?
Right.
That's what they are.
Okay.
It's those 3 that everybody always had.
Okay.
So most of our kids will fall into one of these categories, or all 3 of them actually. So just to be clear, the first one is just social emotional reciprocity.
Okay.
The second one is non-verbal communication.
Okay.
And the third one is developing and maintaining relationships. And these 3 are pretty commonly, checked off when you do diagnosis, even with the criteria right now.
So whether you before had a PDD NOS, or you had Asperger, or you had autism, chances are that, you've got a good chance
You're
of...
going to have these 3.
Okay, great.
Because you might, for instance, if we look at it, a very mild case right now would have, for instance, back at the first category was, deficits in social emotional reciprocity, right? Let's say this child would have difficulty with back and forth conversation.
Okay.
They get hit number 1.
Right.
Number 2 is, they also have a little bit of a difficulty understanding other people's gestures.
Okay.
Okay, and the third one would be, for instance, they don't make friends like other kids do.
Okay.
See how mild it is,
Yes.
but you would qualify.
You qualify. Okay, great.
And on the very severe end, obviously, like
Right.
completely isolated, no eye contact, so
Right.
it works. So that's criterion A, and that's the most important, that has to be present.
Okay.
Now, criterion B is where they deal with all the stereotypical stuff that used to exist also,
Okay.
remember? And so that's restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities as manifested by at least 2 of the following. So they just
Okay.
want you to have 2 of the 4 that they've listed.
Okay.
And of the 2 would be, so here are just some of them: stereotyped or repetitive speech, motor movements, use of objects, and we've said this, sort of the kids who have, repetitive speech like echolalia, or they have motor movements like hand flapping or body rocking, all of that. Second one is excessive adherence to routines. Right? That's our kids who
Right.
have rituals and patterns of, they just want things to be a certain way and they have a hard time. The third one is there too: highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. Like really always having to kind of look at the detail of their toys, or
Right.
all of those. And again, as I said, those 3 are very common language for us who've diagnosed, because those were the classifications that were under stereotypy before.
Sure.
That hasn't changed. These are just examples that
Okay.
were there. But they're saying you need to have 2 of these. Now
Right.
look at the 4th one. The 4th one is awesome. It's brand new. I love it. Thank God they
yeah.
finally got it.
Yeah.
It's the very, very first time sensory comes into the diagnosis. We've never had sensory before. Hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. For instance, indifference to pain, heat, cold, or adverse response to specific sounds, textures, excessive smelling, touching, fascination. I am so happy that came in.
Yes.
Because all of my kids had some form of sensory, the majority of my kids had some form of sensory issue, and it just it wasn't classified.
Right.
So it was always important to treat that, but it wasn't something that would contribute to the child receiving a diagnosis. Now it does.
Which is
Because in
exciting.
criterion B, you need 2 of the 4. And so if let's say someone has repetitive speech and sensory issues, they'll qualify. Or if they have very, item 3, which is the highly restricted fixated interests and the excessive adherence, those to me are caused usually by anxiety. And a lot of my kids have anxiety, so they kind of do obsessive compulsive behaviors.
Right.
So for me, it's awesome, because if I now have a child who has sensory issues and anxiety, which a lot of times the anxiety comes from the sensory dysregulation.
Right.
It's a pretty scary world if things are like too intrusive or too loud, it makes you anxious. Now I have that. If I have a child who has those 2 symptoms, that qualifies for criterion B.
Okay, great.
And that's terrific. So not to get confused, but criterion A was where we were looking at the social and communication.
Right.
Criterion B is where we were looking for the stereotypical repetitive.
Okay, but that's got the added sensory component.
Which is terrific.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Now we have 2 more. We have criterion C,
Okay.
which says that the symptoms must be present in early childhood. So in other words, that was the same as before. Remember, we had said they should be there before the age of 3.
Right.
Symptoms should be apparent. And criterion D is that the symptoms together limit and impair everyday functioning. That's not even necessary. I think they put that in there because, I don't know. I mean, it's funny because in the previous years, whenever I train interns and I'm trying to teach them how to diagnose, I've always told people, and I think we've even said it on this show, that nothing is considered a diagnosis or a disorder unless it impairs day-to-day functioning. I always give the example of, somebody could go home and drink a bottle of scotch every night, and as long as their family is happy, they're functional, they go to work, they can balance their checkbook, everything's fine, they don't have a disorder.
Right.
So the disorder only comes in when it has to do with limiting the individual's everyday functioning.
Right.
And so, in school, when it comes to kids, or within the family structure, And when it comes to adults, it has to do with work.
Can I go back to C for a second?
Sure.
Emily, can you put that back up for a second? Because when we saw last summer and were able to comment, it seemed as though that this, in parentheses, is the new part of this. Is this, or is this, was this in DSM-4 and I just didn't know it was
what this
there?
is, no, it's a clarification. I think what they're trying to say, but may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities. The reason for that is that often excuse me, a parent who this is their first child won't really know what's appropriate or not appropriate, and therefore we only start to see a lot of the problems when the child enters, let's say, preschool.
Yeah.
And so what this is trying to say in the parentheses is that, you know, the child could have had these various symptoms, but because the parent was just not placing demands or was doing their best to try to just walk around the child and take care of the child, the child didn't really show these deficits, or perhaps the child was, you know, homeschooled or in an environment where it just didn't become evident.
Okay.
So this is something good. In other words, it basically says, okay, well, maybe the first person who saw it was the teacher and the child was now 4, which is very common, but that doesn't mean that the symptoms didn't exist before.
Because that sounds great, because I know at least one mom has asked that she has a 7-year-old that when he was getting diagnosed, they said, well, the symptoms weren't there before 3, but has huge social deficits that have become apparent in the last couple of years.
Right.
So he might qualify just because of that parenthetical. Is that possible?
Well, remember we were just talking about Asperger's, and we said that when the children have Asperger's, there's so much, their functioning level is higher, and so a lot of the things about Asperger's, like let's go look at even these. Now let's forget about Asperger's because Asperger's is gone now.
Right.
But let's talk about, for instance, the social deficits that we just went through, right? Let's say someone doesn't have, has, for instance, difficulty with nonverbal communicative behaviors, or deficits in maintaining relationships.
Right.
Okay, developing and maintaining relationships. That's a great one. That's number 3 under criterion A. That's something that doesn't even develop normally until after 3.
Right.
See, when you are 3 or even after 5. So when you're a 3-year-old, you don't have sustained relationships with peers. Every day someone else is your best friend. Right? We all know that. And it has to do with if they brought you candy or gave you their pencil. Okay. That's very normal. So if a child now is really having problems, and let's say they're 5, and their main area is just they can't develop relationships, well, that caveat in the parentheses sort of allows us as diagnosticians to say, okay, well, maybe it wasn't apparent before 3, but it wasn't something that would become apparent.
Right.
So it is now becoming apparent, and the child's 5. That doesn't mean that the earlier deficits weren't there, because there has to be some core cause.
Okay.
The good example of that, Shannon, is theory of mind, is the perspective taking stuff that we know so many of our kids have a problem with, yet perspective taking in normal kids doesn't really even develop until 4 or 5.
Okay.
So how would we say this is a core deficit that must be present before 3? No. An earlier version of it would have had to been present, but it just became apparent after 3.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's what that means.
Okay.
So now we have criterion A, B, C, and D. Okay, and if you remember, all of A, 2 of the symptoms of B, which is the restricted repetitive behaviors, the symptoms have to be there in early childhood, even if you can't see them right away, and they impair the child's everyday functioning.
Okay.
Great. That's it.
Okay.
That's the new diagnostic criteria. And I look at the key differences, and that's on the next slide. And so you notice that the 3 domains now become 2, whereas before it was social and communication and repetitive behaviors. Now it's only social communication and repetitive behaviors. Okay. Second change is that now we don't have categories anymore of autistic disorder, Asperger's, PDD, etc. Now we are just dimensional. It's one-dimensional. It's like far end to, you know, very excessive to not so excessive, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Another new change is that we now require 2 of the repetitive restrictive behaviors. Before 1 was enough.
Right. But there's the addition of the sensory,
That's
which
right.
is quite amazing and makes
That's
that
right.
much more palatable.
That's right, and that's an awesome addition. And the other two really good changes that are on the next slides are we have what are called specifiers and modifiers, which
Okay.
I'm going to go through in a sec.
Okay.
And we have level of severity, which I'm
Okay.
going to go through after that. Okay, so the
Should we
next...
take a break? Would you like to take a break before we do the or you want to
Completely up to
for
you.
John?
Completely up to you.
Let's take a short break, and then we're
Okay.
going to come back to do the specifiers and modifiers and
Great.
severity. So keep your questions coming. Right back more with Dr. Doreen Krampachet after these messages. Welcome back to Autism Live and Ask Dr. Doreen. We have Dr. Doreen Krampachet here with us in the studio, and she is taking apart this DSM-5, the criteria for autism, and it's very exciting to see this all now and see what has changed. You've gone through the DSM-4 so we could see what the status was and some of the differences, and gone through the DSM-5, but now you're going to show us the modifiers and the levels.
That's right, and this is sort of a very key portion of the DSM-5 diagnosis. And so just to really quickly summarize with the DSM-5, we went through that there are two sections now. One is sort of the social communication, and in that you need to have all the symptoms that are listed, although it'll range from pretty severe to moderate to mild. And the second criteria is the repetitive stereotypical behaviors, and in there you have to have two of the symptoms. And then if it's before the age of 3 or early development and it causes problems in functioning or adaptive functioning, then you're good so far for the diagnosis. Now there's two other, so at this point you would basically have the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. What's more important is this is how they're helping us differentiate the kids who are so different from each other.
Okay.
Because you realize we're just kind of, that's why I don't think this is a bad thing, Shannon, because I think what they've done is they've kind of taken away those just random names or labels, put them all in one basket and said, okay, you can be extremely mild or extremely severe as long as you have these things. Now we're going to talk about how to give a better picture of each child. Okay. So with the new criteria, if the child meets the diagnosis of ASD, he's going to receive the diagnosis, and this is the first time ever anybody's even asking etiology. What's causing it? If we know that this is symptoms of autism due to, let's say, a genetic disorder like Rett syndrome or Fragile X, you're going to put it in here now. You're going to say ASD with Rett syndrome, ASD with Fragile X. Now, what's really awesome about this, and it's funny because when you look at the diagnostic, the manual 5 and how the examples they gave, which is Rett syndrome and Fragile X, right? First of all, Rett syndrome, oh my gosh. Rett syndrome used to be one of the ASD, one of the pervasive developmental disorders before, and it is unbelievably rare. I actually don't know the exact prevalence of Rett syndrome, but in my lifetime, and I've been seeing kids for 30 years, more than 30 years, I've maybe diagnosed 3 kids with Rett syndrome, and it's a much more progressive and debilitating genetic disorder. So it's kind of now, but it does at some early stage, it can resemble autism symptoms. And Fragile X, of course, is a pure genetic disorder, and again, at some point early on will resemble the symptoms of autism. And those are the only 2 that they've listed as possible examples, but this is very exciting for me because there's, oh my gosh, so many other genetic disorders that resemble autism, and this is so important, like Angelman syndrome and so on. And I love the fact that we can easily put those children in, because up till now what would happen is if you were diagnosed with a genetic disorder, you were pulled out of autism and all your funding was shut off. Which is horrible. Right, exactly, because it's garbage. Kids who have, let's say, Angelman's or any of these other milder genetic syndromes will benefit tremendously from behavioral intervention, and it wasn't fair that they would be pulled out because someone has discovered their genetic issues.
What a disservice.
So this is very good, and so you can put that in there now. This is very important. And of course, let me see, do I have it on the other pages? I think I do. Well, and the other very important, if I don't, I mean, I should just mention it here. The very cool thing here is this means you can also basically say that the child has other types of medical illnesses. So this is kind of important that you can start throwing these in, right? If you know that it has to be etiology, so it's kind of like pretty clear that this other thing is leading to these symptoms.
Okay.
That gives us a new in. Now the modifiers are kind of interesting as well. The modifiers indicate some other important factor. They're not the cause, but it is an important factor for diagnosticians or treatment providers to be aware of, for instance, with seizures, ASD with seizures, ASD with intellectual disabilities. Now this is kind of very, very important, that last one, because historically, people had always thought of autism as, okay, so back in, I think it was DSM-3, maybe even, people were saying things like, oh, it's the, you know, if you have a child with autism, they're also mentally retarded. They have mental retardation, and I fought that for years and years and years. Now what they're saying is, if the child has mental retardation, you can put that in. So in other words, they're agreeing with the fact that the vast majority of our kids don't have it. So that's awesome. So that's another thing.
Very awesome.
Yeah, these are modifiers. So those are two other things. I have to kind of speed up, don't I? Because I'm almost
That's
done,
all right.
actually. I'm almost
we'll take
done.
as much time as it takes.
Right. So then the other things that go in, again, on the specifiers and modifiers are things like early history. And these are awesome things. Like, you're giving so much more information on the diagnosis now than you ever did.
Okay.
So, for instance, age of perceived onset.
Yeah.
Before, you either had autistic disorder or you had what was called childhood disintegrative disorder, which was for kids who regressed. None of us ever used childhood disintegrative disorder. It was just such a silly, you know, contrast. This allows us to actually talk about the pattern of onset within the diagnosis. So, you know, was there a loss of skills? When did it happen? And so you could be actually diagnosing kids as things like ASD with onset before 20 months and loss of words.
Wow.
Or ASD with onset before 32 months and loss of social skills, you know? That is spectacular. Like, I love defining it this way. Or you could just simply say ASD with no clear onset and no loss. This is a child who just never progressed.
And, you know, am I leaping too far? But to me, it seems like that will help in our ongoing struggle to phenotype autism. If this information is put in at diagnosis, and then we see and track the progress, it's going to help us down the road to be able to know what's effective for each one of those categories.
Right. It's going to be much, much more helpful, for sure, definitely, no question.
Yeah. Love that.
And so if you wanted to hear in this category, in the modifiers or specifiers, you can also say ASD Asperger's type.
Okay.
So in other words, what would have previously been diagnosed as Asperger's, now you can mention it here.
Great.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
So the specifiers and modifiers are terrific. They really are.
For everybody.
Absolutely, they're wonderful. And finally, the last new addition is the level of severity. Now, the level of severity essentially gives you 3 levels, and that's level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 means the child requires support. Level 2 means the child requires, or the adult requires substantial support, and level 3 means requires very substantial support. And we've given a few examples within social communication, if someone, and restricted behaviors. So, you know, if you need some support, that means in the area of social communication, without support, there would be some significant deficits in social communication. That's the mildest. But look at level 3, if you require very substantial support, that means really if you look at this individual's social communication, it's pretty much non-existent, very minimal social communication. Or if you look at the restricted behaviors, a mild version might be significant interference in at least one context. In other words, this person is self-stimulating, but only in school. Whereas a level 3 child might have constant self-stimulatory behavior in daily life. So this is where it gives you the ability to differentiate the severity level.
So, forgive me for asking what's probably a ridiculous question, but is this kind of mimicking, because we use terms like high functioning and profoundly affected?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
instead we're going to say level 1, level 2, and level 3?
Right, it is, and it's because of it absolutely. I mean, the high functioning, low functioning type thing will be kind of determined by these.
Okay.
Because really, the more impacted, the lower functioning a person is considered, then the more support they need, obviously. Right. So that they would be a level 3.
Okay.
And I think this is also very critical because keep in mind we don't have Asperger's and PDD anymore.
Right.
So this is sort of to differentiate those kids perhaps that have a higher, like less deficit would be level 1.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. I like the levels of severity.
Okay.
Now, and that's the diagnostic criteria. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, which will also impact some people's lives, which I think is important, is that a new diagnosis that came in now or is coming into the DSM is called social communication disorder. Okay. That's the next slide. I just put this in because this is a brand new thing I haven't seen before. And social communication disorder will be, it's a rule-out diagnosis for kids. If I want to diagnose a child with ASD now, I just need to make sure that it isn't social communication disorder. And this means this is the individual who has some impairment in pragmatic use of language, so abstract social language. And they have a difficulty in the social use of verbal and nonverbal communication. So in other words, they have a hard time with relationships. And it can't be explained by low IQ or word structure or grammar problems. And the symptoms. So this is that scary new diagnosis where some kids may fall into this who used to be Asperger's.
Right.
And they might fall into this now. And if they do fall into this, this is not a funded disorder. Right? It's not part of the ASD.
Okay, so this is the scary part.
This is the one that we have to be cautious about. For me, it's a very clear difference if a child has social communication problems versus a child who has ASD. And that's just very clear for me. First of all, I don't think that you can look at these social communication stuff when you're looking at really young kids.
Right.
Because a lot of the social communication stuff comes up later in life.
Okay.
So, but this is the one that scares me and it really has nothing to do with the ASD diagnosis. It's this new one, which I fear a little bit because, it says, academic achievement, when those types of things start hitting our kids and a diagnosis comes in that says this is what your kid has, it's not going to lead directly to behavioral interventions. That's a problem.
Okay, that is a problem.
So really the main clinical implications, I guess, things that we need to think about and see how they roll out are now, and this is, by the way, something else that's kind of new, which is very important. And I said this, I criticized so many other people diagnosing, because often you would see a diagnosis of autism on the first, and then you would also see a diagnosis of ADHD. A lot of parents would tell me, my child was diagnosed with autism and attention deficit. And I'd say, well, the diagnostician messed up. You're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
It was not allowed. You could not diagnose ADHD with autism because autism was considered much more pervasive and severe. Okay. And it would be kind of like diagnosing someone with like pneumonia and bronchitis.
Okay.
It wouldn't work. Now you're allowed to. Now they're seeing them as two separate things, and they're saying, okay, you can say ADHD and ASD.
Okay.
So this is a big, big, big new thing.
Okay.
And of course now you realize all those gold standard assessments, the ADOS, all that is gone now. They have to redo everything.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're working on redoing all those new assessments. And I think the main implication or the biggest thing that we'll have to see how it rolls out is just really how it will help or hinder services and funding.
The funding.
Yeah.
Which
Those
is always, unfortunately, because it shouldn't be.
Absolutely. And we just have to be very careful.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to be careful. And there's, even to this day, I don't think there are too many people that really understand autism very well, and so it's very important that people who are diagnosing really understand how to do this correctly.
And is there any sort of training that they will?
Not existing. Well, I mean, you could most likely in a year or so there will be some continuing education courses on diagnostics, but they won't be just autism. You know, you'll go to a 2-hour class and it'll review every change that's in the DSM-5.
So I guess one of my huge takeaways with this, and something we say a lot here, when you're going to do an assessment, make sure that it's the top quality assessment. If you're going to invest the time and the money, make sure it's top quality assessment. And I always like to advise that whoever is doing the assessment is not tied to who holds the purse strings.
That's very, very true. That's right. And sometimes we would have here in California, the regional centers would do their own assessments, and then it would go one way or another. Yeah, there's a conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
I guess I would suggest to parents, you know, if you have if I'm not going to go back and re-diagnose my kids. Like this is something important. Like right now, if you have a child with autism or Asperger's or whatever it is, unless there's some benefit to your child in terms of funding, I would just leave it alone. None of us
grandfathered in, right?
Yeah. Well, what's going to happen is, I assume, with the insurance companies, they're going to change your diagnosis to ASD. Then the next round where you are up for funding again, we're going to have to provide new diagnoses.
Okay.
But it's not like you're going to go, none of us are going to go, I have 2,000 kids, I'm not going to go back and re-diagnose everyone, but I will when their insurance stuff comes up or their funding, if the funding questions, that'll be a few years.
Okay.
If you now get a child, so I would just leave it alone and not get too disturbed about it, because really this is just for your services and funding. If you have a child who right now is going into diagnosis and the clinician provides a diagnosis or doesn't, then I would really probably try to see a specialist or an expert, because really it's, you know, that's important. It's just I only worry about the high level kids who need intervention, who may now fall into that social communication disorder category, and that would be a little upsetting, because those are the kids that really do need help.
Okay.
Jack Riley starts his day with Jessica and AB therapy at 8 a.m. Each session he has lasts around 2 hours, with a total amount of therapy of 40 hours per week. This includes occupational therapy, speech therapy, and ABA therapy.
What do you want to play with today?
Train.
That's what I thought. Yay, there you go. There's trains and tracks. Nice.
So what's an average of programs you try to get done in a session with a kid?
I try to incorporate a lot of things as much as I can. Like, for instance, if he was playing with trains, I'd incorporate functional pretend play. So that's just basically teaching him how to play with the toy appropriately, the way it's supposed to be played, building a track and having him move, and using vocalizations. Choo-choo, let's go, all aboard, things like that.
Choo-choo.
All right, say all aboard.
All aboard.
All right. As he's so little, we're building a lot of language. It's language, 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 all the time. So we work on banding, so having him request for things for me.
What train? What trains? What track?
We can also work on tacting, which is having him label, like the colors, the names of the trains.
That's the trees. It's Thomas.
It's Thomas. Also, we can work on getting attention. I would withhold the preferred trains or tracks and have him tap my shoulder to get more pieces.
He wants to go.
Hi, what do you want?
What train?
You want trains. We can also work on compliance, like come here and give it to me. Wait. Come here. Yeah! That's such good listening. Good job, mister. So there's a lot of things I can kind of incorporate, at the same time in one sitting. And as far as his behaviors, I haven't really seen anything. Hey, sit up. Well, just now. Yeah, with his visual stereotypy, his is just looking at things from a different angle or sideways or upside down. But he rarely engages in that except just,
What?
Pickers.
Huh?
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
I'm filming you.
Okay.
That's cool.
That's cool.
Can you say hi?
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Say hi, everybody.
Hi, bye.
Who is that?
Jack.
Jack? Jack who?
Jack Riley.
Where's your nose? Where's your ears? Where's your eyes? Where's your chin? Ooh.
Where's your teeth? Is that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your head? Where's your tummy? Okay, I'm gonna need you now. Give me clothes. Good job. What's a hat?
Cool.
Clothes. Oh my goodness, you're so smart.
Jessica and Jack Riley are continuing to work on categories.
Give me vehicle. Oh, sorry. Thanks. Give me vehicle. Nice. What's a fire truck?
White truck.
What is it?
Vehicle.
It's a vehicle. Cool. Give me clothes. Good job. What's a dress?
Clothes.
Clothes. Nice. Here you go. Here's your sticker. Give me furniture. Nice job. What's a table? Furniture. Perfect. Give me clothes. Good job. What's a jacket? What's a jacket? No, what's a jacket? No. Hey, hey. What's a jacket? No, what's a jacket? Cl. Cl. It's cl.
It's taken.
What is it?
It's clothes.
It's clothes. So what's a jacket?
Clothes.
Clothes. Good job. Here, put Tigger on. Yeah, you're all done. You want your trains or bed?
Taste.
Okay, go play with your train.
Okay, see you later.
Good morning and welcome to Let's Talk Autism. I'm Nancy Oswald Jackson.
I'm Shannon Penrod.
Hi.
Hi. And it's World Autism Awareness Month.
Yes.
World Autism Awareness Day on Monday. Have you been, I'm sure you've got a bunch of events and things. Obviously, you've got the run coming up.
Yes, we have
It's a busy month.
It's a very busy month.
I always say to people, it's, think of it as like tax time for people that are in the autism community. And then I go,
Right.
It is tax time. So we have that on top of it. I always say I'm going to get my taxes done before April so that I don't have to
Doesn't
contend with both.
everybody?
It doesn't happen.
Never does.
It doesn't happen.
At least not for me either.
No. Can't happen. There's too many other things going on.
But you had a big show on Monday.
We had a huge show on Monday, and it was really, I would have liked it to have been longer, and I wish you had been there too. But what it ended up being was a lot of really strong women from the autism community and Matt Asner. So it was all women and Matt Asner. But this year the UN has declared this year the focus in autism around the world is on women and girls on the autism spectrum.
Right,
So
which
it
is
was
long
very
overdue
appropriate.
because
Yes.
more boys are diagnosed with autism, so they tend to get more of the attention.
Absolutely. I always say that I think the girls and the parents and the families surrounding the girls have it the hardest because they're dealing with all the things that we're dealing with, plus there aren't the services. They take their daughter to the services, and it's a bunch of boys. And you go, where is the stuff that's just for girls? And there are different physical considerations and safety issues for girls.
Yes.
There just are. So, and we know from what they said around the world, girls on the spectrum are more likely not to finish primary school, even primary school. Isn't that devastating? Obviously, that's not the case in the United States, but around the world, that's true. Women and girls on the autism spectrum are more likely to be discriminated against in the workplace and in general, both for gender and for disability, and they're more likely to experience violence against them than anybody else within that group. So horrifying.
It's a very important focus then.
Yes, very important focus. And you and I've got a big show today.
Yes,
We're
we
going to
do.
be focusing on a lot of different things. I've got a great guest.
Yes, it's all about safety,
Yes,
which as we know is
Natasha
a primary
Barber.
concern.
Yes, always. And then we've got a lot of, because it's April, we always get more news in
stories.
April about autism, and I'm thrilled that I feel like most of these are on the positive side.
Yes, they are. We have positive news stories today.
Yes, which is
Not a
really
lot.
important. I will say that there were stories that we could have covered that were like so bad that I can't even go there. But these are good.
Yes.
And there's a lot of them. So should we jump right in?
Yeah, the first story is about biomusic, offering kids with autism a new way to communicate.
And I love this. We found this in Smithsonian.com, great outlet. And for those of you who tuned in a couple of Christmases ago, one of the gifts that we were offering was something called a Makey Makey. And this really reminds me of the Makey Makey because the Makey Makey, it's so cool. If you've got a kiddo that's 10 or up and loves technology, get them a Makey Makey. It's got alligator clips, and you clip the alligator clip to something and then to this board. It's I guess an Arduino board is what they call it. And it can make and then you clip that board to the computer. And if you, for instance, you can tap your chest, and if you tell it to, it will make a noise. And you can program what noise to make. Well, what a group of scientists did was that they said, what if we were to put sensors on an individual and see that perhaps is nonverbal and see if their mood can talk to the computer and create sounds that convey the mood. So they put music tones that would, and it was a lot of programming, and they have to be hooked up to a lot of different sensors, and they put them in situations where they were happy, and then there were situations where there was some stress, and then they took the music and they had parents listen to the music and say, can you predict from the sound of the music which one your child was in this circumstance, which one, and they could. The parents were like, I can clearly, and think about this, from the point of view of a parent who has a non-verbal, non-vocal child who doesn't yet have functional communication, to be able to hear when the child is escalating, fascinating. Absolutely.
Hear when the child is happy, hear when the child is calm.
It's a way in, and it's a beautiful way in that makes some really beautiful music. If you go to Smithsonian.com, you can read all about it. And at the bottom, there's a place where you can click and listen to some of the music that the children make just sitting or doing an art project or doing whatever, to hear what's a clue into what's happening inside them. I think it's fascinating.
And they're talking about eventually being able to put sensors and stuff like a Fitbit, like wristband.
Yes.
Are you okay?
Well, I whapped myself and then I messed up my mic.
Right now they're using more obtrusive sensors like a chest strap and a finger.
Yeah, it's not something that you can go walking around in the world with yet, but they're working on that. They're doing more studies. We should say that this, that you can, the people who did this are from Holland Bloorview. Isn't that a great name? And it's Stephanie Blaine Morales and Elaine Bidis. And you can read more
To
about it if you
female
go,
science,
right?
biomedical.
And
or,
you can go to Smithsonian.com right now and read more about it because I think it's really fascinating. What a wonderful, because even for our kids that are verbal, there are times when they don't want to.
Right, when they don't want to tell you what kind of mood they're in and what
Yeah,
kind of,
and to
they don't
be
want to
able,
communicate.
be able to have them communicate that to us through music, I just think that's beautiful.
I do too.
I love it, love it, love it. Next story we've got, really exciting news that came out last night and today. Sesame Place, which is the theme park in Philadelphia that's like Sesame Street, where people can go.
Have you ever been there?
I have not.
I haven't either.
I have not. I have to say, we've got two stories that are generating out of Philadelphia today. So Philadelphia is just rocking it. But I haven't been to Philadelphia in a long time. Maybe I need to get back to Philadelphia. Have you been
It's
there
a great
recently?
city. I haven't been there recently. No.
I years ago was there, but I haven't been there recently. So they're closed right now, but they're reopening at the end of April, and it is the first place to achieve an autism accreditation, which is really fabulous. They're getting this award because their entire staff has completed training on autism sensitivity and awareness, and they have pledged to have ongoing sensitivity and awareness. I don't think that that's anything particularly new. We have a lot of theme parks. Legoland has been particularly fabulous about this, I have to say. Disneyland and Disney World had been at the forefront of it for a lot of years, and now people are catching up. I will say, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it, and then Disney can get mad at me. I was asked to come in with an expert this last fall.
Yeah.
And I worked with some of the ho, I don't want to say because there might be little people watching, that were at the park at Disneyland and helped to raise their awareness.
Oh, you did?
And give them tools for things that they can do to interact, because people may or may not know that my husband is a professional ho individual.
Okay.
And we have a sensitive Santa event.
Right.
So we have a great deal of experience with children on the spectrum meeting ho people.
Right.
And so we were asked to come in to
And help
Disneyland
train.
and help train.
What an honor.
It was. I mean, it was so exciting. Right now, I'm working with a team of people for the Natural History Museum here in Los Angeles to have them have a great sensory experience at their museums, because they have 3 museums here in Los Angeles. So while I don't think this is anything particularly new, what is new is that there is a new it's the International Board of Credentialing and Continuing Education Standards, the IBCCES, that's a mouthful, that is now saying to places, if you'd like to complete this, we'll give you a stamp of approval.
Right.
How
So
smart
we
of
hope-
them to have created that.
Yes, it is.
Right?
So we hope that other parks follow suit. And,
Yes.
And
one of the things that they have are quiet spaces at Sesame Place, and they have information and a map, a sensory map to give parents. There are lots of places that, like I said, that already have that. One of my favorite, the Smithsonian has things like that already on their website. Before you go to a place, go on their website and check and see what
if they have it.
Yeah.
Also in the news, a new drug on the horizon.
Yeah, in an actual trial with because we talk a lot about mouse models, and this is an actual trial with actual people
With
on the spectrum.
actual people, that's right. And
It's
it's called, I had the name right here in front of me, but
Well, the place is at the Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, and the drug is called Balovaptan.
Balovaptan. And they're doing a nationwide clinical trial, which includes 300 children and teens with high-functioning autism.
And they're looking at this in particular because, as you know, Nancy, there is no approved drug for treating the symptoms of autism, things like social difficulties, repetitive behaviors, and the ability to function in everyday life. And Dr. Eric Hollander, who is the director of the Autism and Obsessive Compulsive Spectrum Program at Montefiore, is one of the people that's helping to run this. Doesn't that in and of itself sound interesting? The autism and obsessive compulsive spectrum, those two things together, because you and I both know, I mean, I'm somebody who has obsessive compulsive, and we have kids that are on the spectrum that can get obsessive compulsive
My
about
son has
something.
OCD.
And, so I love that people are looking at these things together. This drug they're hoping will be something that will help in those particular areas.
They say the way it works was it prevents a molecule thought to influence social behavior from binding to brain receptors.
And isn't that fascinating
Yes,
in and of itself?
And they've done previous research on adults that show symptoms improved.
Really
so
exciting.
That's something new to be on the lookout for.
And hopefully, within a short period of time, because so often we say, well, mouse model, we'll get back to you, right? But this is they're working with, which means they've come quite a way with this.
Yeah.
So in other news coming from Philadelphia, Gabriella Kaplan-Mayer, who we've had on the show before, who is amazing and does recipes and talks about cooking in the kitchen with our kids on the spectrum. I've always enjoyed her and the way she talks about getting kids to, touch food and get into it.
Right.
She has written an article that appeared in Philly Parenting. That's why I say Philadelphia is just hot on this
Autism Awareness Month.
And I thought it was really a great piece that she said 5 ways that you can support parents of autistic children.
Shall we go through them?
Yeah, I think this is wonderful because a lot of you and I have had this conversation before about we don't know what to say to people.
What can parents do to help when people say, how can I help?
Yes, and it's just so hard because sometimes you want to go, really, do I have to tell you how to do that?
Yeah.
So now you can just give them this article, print it out and take it to your local thing and go, here's how you can help me.
Good idea.
And you don't have to ask for it yourself. So let's go through them.
The first one is to learn. While it's much more common than ever before, there is a lack of good education in media and pop culture. So she recommends the Autism Acceptance book is a terrific resource, and she has a list of videos if you go on the site to take a look at this article.
And what a great thing to say to family members, or friends that surround when your child is diagnosed. I want you to get educated about what this is and what it isn't. It's an important piece instead of just necessarily watching a movie about there's a character with autism. She also encourages people to plan. She does a specific call out to people who run groups. If you for a lot of years have been so involved in helping your church with a special needs ministry. And she does a shout out to people like that. Whatever group that you're involved in, you need to plan ahead. Once you've learned about autism, plan ahead. Have
a quiet room.
Have an option for people to be someplace else that's a little less quiet, but don't just hope that it's all going to work out. When I think of all the years, it really makes a difference to me. I don't know about you, Nancy, but just recently there was something that my son went to, and one of the moms made a huge effort to try to make sure that there was something for him to eat because they were feeding a group of kids.
That's always having GFCF food there is something.
And I got to tell you, it just meant so much to me.
It means a lot to me as well. Wyatt's Sunday school teacher has GFCF snacks for him.
And it just really... I love it. I've gone to birthday parties before where they didn't know what to get that was food-wise, but maybe they were giving a candy bar when kids were leaving and they knew that Jem couldn't have a candy bar, but so they got him a toy instead. Or just called and said, what can I get for him? And then in those circumstances, what I've said to them is, don't worry about it. I'll bring something to put in the same little goodie bag that you have. And they go, really? And I love them. And I'm like, oh, this is a person who supports me just because they called and asked a question.
Yeah.
So love the whole plan thing, which then leads us to the next one.
To invite. If your child is inviting the whole class to a birthday party, make sure autistic classmates who are fully or partially included in the class with or without supports. Reach out to the parents that have the autistic child and let them know you're excited for them to come. Yeah. And because sometimes they're excluded and parents don't know. They feel like, well, I don't know whether I can have this child here.
Yeah.
So it's so important to be invited and not be excluded.
And I think we've all been through a moment like that in our lives where we're like, oh, I don't know how to support that child in this circumstance. But it's important to just face it. Face it, talk about it, get over it, make whatever plans so that we don't exclude people, because it's not okay and it doesn't feel good on either side. And then the last one is to advocate. When I know on this Saturday I'm going to the Mardi Gras for Autism in Fullerton. And I know already, because I've been to it so many times, I'm going to cry, but I know that in Fullerton, what I'm going to see on that day is not just families on the autism spectrum with kiddos on the autism spectrum. The vast majority of the people that I'm going to see there that day are people from the community who come out to be there with the families. Because they are advocating for them, they're supporting them, they speak out, they put their tax dollars to things that are inclusive. They, make sure that everybody has what they need.
Right.
And that the special needs classroom has what it needs. I mean, the Fullerton Cares has said, we're going to step up and help our community and help ourselves, but the rest of the community has gone with them, and you can't do it without them. Last week on the show, we had the pediatric dentist from Fullerton who comes out and supports. And, when you have dentists saying, oh, no, I want to come and support because this is a part of our community, you're doing something right. We love Fullerton.
Right. And the last one is to reach out. You may not know how to support a friend, sibling, coworker, or neighbor who's raising a child with autism. You may avoid them, but go ahead and just reach out and let them know that, you're there to offer a helpful help if you can, and ask them, and you're there to listen.
It's a way of asking people to be human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sometimes we go, really? Do I have to ask people? But, people get scared, people get frightened, they don't want to say something wrong. And we've all had somebody come up to us and say something wrong, right? So it's not like that can't happen. So we need to encourage them. And when they say something wrong, we need to kind of let it go, laugh about it in private. And I do mean laugh about it, because you can't, ignorance is ignorance, right? And we all want to move everything into the knowledgeable area. But so our last story today is an interesting and semi-controversial one, right?
Yeah, out of Colorado.
Yep.
The lawmakers are pushing to declare autism an epidemic that they believe would pave the way for more research and funding.
And this is something that, we've expressed before on the show, and had people express before. People look at the rise of autism and go, why is nobody calling this an epidemic? And there's been several calls from the community to call it an epidemic. There is a bill in Colorado that's House Bill 1223, and the bill paves the way for more research and for funding. But they are asking to declare it an epidemic. And the reason why is that they're saying that they have seen, get ready, hold on to your seat cushions.
Unbelievable.
An increase since 1992 of the cases of autism in Colorado by 41,729%. 41,729% increase. Increase. Even if it was just that those were individual cases, we would all go, right? But that's
a percentage.
That's 41,729%. So they're looking to call this an epidemic. Now, part of and we had talked about this before we went on the air, when we look up the word epidemic, there are two different definitions. When you're using it as a noun, the definition is a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. That's when it's a noun. When it's an adjective, it is relating to the nature of an epidemic in that it is widespread. So I don't know that anybody else has pared it down to that before, but so often the autism community has said, why aren't we calling it an epidemic? And
it doesn't meet the definition under the noun of under infectious.
But I think, knowledge is power. And so if we now know, if you use it as an adjective, then we, that this is an epidemic, that the rise of autism has been epidemic-like or been of an epidemic nature, then we are using it properly. Absolutely. So just something to think about.
Lots in the news.
Lots in the news. So we've got this great guest, Natasha Barber, from Autism Moms Know Safety.
Which came out of her own personal experience.
Yes, and so we're going to be joined by her in just a minute. Shall we take a short break?
Yeah, let's take a break.
We'll be right back after these messages.
everyone, welcome back. It's April, which means it's also spring. And what we're going to be doing today is making our very own chia pets. What's cool about this project, it's an activity that you can revisit with your family as you watch it grow and change. All right, now that I piqued your interest, let's get to it. The materials we'll be needing are water, dirt, arts and craft materials, chia seeds, a container, and nylon. So let's get started. It's super easy. All you're gonna do is you're gonna take an old pair of nylons that you have, you're gonna cut off the toe, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna take some of your chia seeds and sprinkle them at the very bottom. We don't need too much, just a little bit. And then once I've got my chia seeds there, I'm gonna take my dirt and pour that in. And we wanna make sure that we've got quite a bit in there. You wanna keep this tail. What this does is acts as a way to soak up the water to feed your little chia plant. So I'm gonna take the bottom now, I'm gonna tie this into a knot. So now that I've got this little guy, now it's time to decorate him. And you can decorate him however you feel like. What I did is that I made some little features out of felt that I'm gonna add to my little guy to give him a face. Now that I've got them all decorated, I'm gonna pour some water into my container and make sure my tail is all nice and soaked up in there. And here's my little buddy. I made a mouse, but you can always make whatever kind of creature your child finds super reinforcing. Make sure they like the little animal that you make so they'll wanna come back and revisit him. As you can see right now, he's a little bald, but hopefully, keeping your fingers crossed, in a week he'll have some hair. With the snap of my fingers, we're gonna go through a week in a few seconds. And oh my gosh, this little guy has changed quite a bit. Can you see how? Yeah, he's got some hair now. You can have your kids describe how this little guy looks to their friends, and you can even work on body parts by having them label all the features that this little guy has on his face. So let's see, what does he have? He's got eyes, a nose, a mouth, and ears. What do you think will happen to him if I stop watering him? Yeah, he probably won't be growing any more hair if I did that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this activity. I know I did. Tune in next time, okay? And until then, craft on. Bye, guys.
Can you see me? Can you see me flying by your side?
Hello, activists. Let's talk about step 7. Recognize your gifts and abilities. Whatever gifts and abilities you had before autism entered your life, you have them now. And I bet you've developed some that you didn't even know you had. Those gifts and abilities are going to help you in your journey of parenting a child with autism spectrum disorders. Maybe you're a born researcher, teacher, negotiator, or organizer. Well, you're going to need all of those talents. And you could find a whole new calling. That's what happened to me. If you had told me 20 years ago that I was going to leave behind a career as a television producer to work as an autism advocate and activist, I would have said, you're nuts. If you don't think you have any special gifts or abilities, ask someone who loves you. They'll tell you what they are. I guarantee you, you have them. What's your special gift? Find it, use it, for yourself, for your child, for the good of all concerned. Until next time, keep the faith.
And we are back, and we now have with us a guest named Natasha Barber. She is the author of the children's book series Tommy's Lessons. She's the mom to an 11-year-old son with autism who inspired her to become an autism safety advocate blogger. She said she's had her fair share of safety scares. One afternoon, Joshua escaped his aftercare program, ran onto a 50-mile-per-hour road. Traffic stopped. Thankfully, he wasn't injured. However, that was the day Natasha had her epiphany and her sense of safety heightened immensely. She was suddenly propelled into a hyper safety mode, wanted to make sure this could never happen again, signed up for safety workshops to learn more, found that so many parents were uneducated, and that's when she took this on as a cause. She has since developed a website, Facebook page, and Instagram focused on keeping young autistic children safe. Welcome to the show, Natasha. Good resume there.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
So happy to have you.
We're thrilled because we've been wanting to have this interview with you for a while. Let's start by talking about your amazing son and how wonderful he is. Tell us a little bit about him.
Thank you. So Joshua, he was diagnosed when he was about 2 years old, nonverbal. He didn't really have attention to detail in his surroundings. He really, the no fear, he just didn't understand safety. And then over the course of development, we started realizing that safety was becoming more and more of a concern out in the community and in the school, not just in the home. So, we started by climbing and little things that you would normally childproof anyways, and it just became more of a wandering risk where he could hurt himself. Very focused on running in towards the lake that we had in the back. So anyways, Joshua right now has significantly progressed. He's in therapy every single day, more vocal now. I'm very proud of him. He's making leaps and bounds and strides, but we still have the safety concerns of him not understanding what a stranger is or understanding what traffic is. So we're still constantly, I've got a GPS on him. I monitor him everywhere he goes, and we're just working towards getting that awareness and getting that safety understanding.
And how old is he again now?
He actually just turned 12.
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah, so time flies.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, how did you get started as a writer, Natasha?
Actually, when Joshua escaped the first time at his before-after care, I started writing, just writing everything that we were doing over the course of that year that he had escaped, and we had that major safety scare. And then when I went to the workshops and started listening to other parents and their worries and concerns, I started realizing I wanted to write more of a safety manual. And so it grew, the writing grew, and eventually it became a full-fledged manual. And I held back from publishing it because I realized nobody knew me as safety mom or anything safety or autism related. So I held back and started the websites and the Instagram and news feeds. And then actually one day my oldest, because I have 2 boys, and my oldest was in before after care, and I picked him up early, and he was playing dodgeball, and he was kind of upset with me because I picked him up early, and so I was trying to make light of it and trying to make him a little happier, and I'm like, so how was your day? And he's like, oh, you know what my day was like. And I'm like, well, no, did you eat your lunch? And he was kind of a little bit grumpy, and he was really small. He was only like 6 or 7 at the time. And I'm like, oh, so you ate my tomato guacamole onion sandwich? And he's like, well, no. And I had just thrown out all the ingredients that I knew he hated just to get a smile on his face. And I actually liked the whole combination of my tomato guacamole onion sandwich. I really liked it, wrote it down, and over the course of that month, it just became my first Tommy's Lessons book.
Okay.
Love it.
And you've written a couple of those Tommy's Lessons books, right?
Yep, we're actually on the 4th one right now. My illustrator is working on finishing up the illustrations.
And where are those books available?
They're all available on Amazon, and they're kind of like Dennis the Menace with a little bit of magic flair. So it's a little guy who's 7 years old. His name's Tommy. He has a pet mini pincher that follows him everywhere, and he manages to get into trouble without really intentionally doing it, whether he didn't know something. But at the end, he always learns a lesson. It's not what he was supposed to learn, and he always has a perception that there was some type of magic that was the reason that caused, him getting in trouble.
Right. And then after you wrote that book series, you wrote the first autism awareness children's book, The Waiting Song. Is that correct?
I did, yes. So The Waiting Song actually is inspired by Joshua. Joshua, when he was in therapy, he had a really hard time with the understanding of the actual concept of waiting. And it was actually quite unsafe, because if something didn't go his way, or he had to wait for, like, for instance, his video that was buffering, he would literally throw it in the air, go flying, and bolt. And of course, he didn't have that understanding of what he was running into. Sometimes he'd fall to the ground. So again, he wasn't looking at his surroundings of what he would be falling into. So it was quite scary for us, and a concern. So the therapist started a waiting program, and the waiting program, over the course of a month, he started developing, in order to cope with waiting, he started developing this cute little jingle. And so I called his teacher, I called his therapist. I'm like, did you guys teach him that? And they were like, no, we didn't. So one night I wrote down the songs, the lyrics to his waiting song. And at the same time, we had one of his therapists came in one day, and she's like a sister to us. And she had a pet hedgehog named Nigel, who had just died that night before. And so we're like, oh, I'm so sorry, but yet what a cool name for a hedgehog. And she loved Josh. Josh adored her. So I asked her, what about if we make Nigel come back, because she was so upset. Let's make him come back, and Josh will be the inspiration, and his name will be Nigel. And so over the course of that little time period, I created the waiting song, and it's about Nigel who can't wait, and he learns to cope. He's in an inclusion class, and we made the characters kind of threw in the diversity aspect, because a lot of the characters in the book, it's a boar, it's a giraffe, a zebra, as you can see, a hedgehog. These aren't characters you typically would see, like they're not the nice fluffy white bunny or teddy bear. So we kind of threw in the diversity aspect, and then the children learn that what Nigel's all about, and his disability of having autism, which in Nigel's case, he learns a little bit slower, he has trouble waiting, and at the end, everybody, learns a lesson on diversity and disabilities. And I think it's a powerful lesson for the elementary kids right now, who, because there's more disabilities in this world, and autism, as everyone knows, it's 1 in 68. I think when Joshua was diagnosed, it was like 1 in 153 or something like that. So it's drastically more kiddos that are getting diagnosed. And I think the elementary kids, they need to understand that, so that they have the empathy and compassion and understanding that not everybody's the same.
Right.
So it's a perfect book for that 3 to 5 year old level, preschool grade.
So these are great. Where can we get them?
All on Amazon. So they're all available on Amazon.
Okay, and then you started a nonprofit organization, Autism Moms No Safety. What motivated you to do that, and tell us about that?
So it's the same when he escaped, and I started learning more about safety and going to all those workshops and writing my manuals. It sparked it when I realized nobody knew me, and I wanted to share what I was learning in all of these workshops and everything that my husband and I were doing in the home, and trying to get him as safe as we possibly can everywhere he was. So we started with the website, Autism Moms No Safety, and that website has now grown into a nonprofit. And then now we recently launched the Autism Moms No Safety kits. And the kits are just jam-packed full of everything that I could possibly put in a small little kit that is instant, immediate gratification, things that parents can do or get in their hands to start their safety journey with their child. So it's got coupons and samples of temporary bracelets. It's got actual stop signs that you can use as visual prompts on your door or window. It's got a couple little bracelets, like the truck type bracelets you would get in a fair, so you could put your child's name, perfect for like a school outing or a mall. It's got emergency contact forms in there that you can fill out and give one to your school or one to the bus garage or even police. I dropped one off at the police station and said, this is my son, he's autistic, I want Joshua to be in the 911 registry, and they did. They put him in there, and anytime somebody calls 911 either from my house or for my house, the emergency response crew already knows that Joshua's autistic and a flight risk. So all these different items that I've put in there are just immediate. You get it in your hand, you can start using them or going out and getting your products that people don't really and didn't even realize existed. So I think it's a pretty great package. I've worked with a lot of companies. I'm slowly getting different organizations and corporate sponsors. So it's starting to grow. I've got them actually all over the world now. I've sent some to Australia. I've sent some to England. Right up to Ireland and the Philippines, Canada. So they're going everywhere. I think the last count at the end of March was over 513 kits that have gone out or come in as requests. So
how do people request them, Natasha?
So they can go onto my website, either autismmomsnosafety.com, or we just actually rebadged to just very, very recent amks.life. So it's much shorter, but you can go on my website, and under there's a tab for safety kits, and when you scroll down, you'll see like a donate button. So and then if you keep going down, you'll see all the information, like the spot where you can put in all your information, and then I would get an email notification that there's a kit request that's come in, and
how much do they cost?
So they're free for the parents. I don't charge shipping. I don't charge anything for the parents. They just have to fill in the information and they get a free kit. It's 100%. It started 100% out of pocket, and now I'm trying to work slowly, working with different companies and trying to get grants and whatnot to fund it and continue funding so I can continue sending out kits. But I don't charge a single cent to any parents.
That is amazing.
That
is amazing. I have to say that we have somebody who wrote in to the show and said that you're a rock star. It happens to be Carrie Mallory Thompson, who's going to be on the show tomorrow. And she said she was so excited because you're a rock star, and I can completely agree with her and see why she said that.
Now, you have some safety measures that you say that all people need to know after they get an autism diagnosis. Do you want to go through those? Those are like, we have 3 here that you...
You have 3. I don't remember off the top of my head. I actually have another article. I did 5 total.
Okay.
But
well, the first one was safeguarding the doors and the windows.
Yes. So definitely you want to put the door alarms. And actually, this is actually one of the posters I've got in the kit, which is the door alarms that you can put on your doors and windows. You can get them from either Walmart or hardware store. But they're a magnetic-based alarm. They literally have like a double-side sticky tape. You put them on the door and the door jamb, or the window, and then the window side. But it's magnetic-based, so the moment that the 2 separate, meaning the door is open, it will send off like an internal. It doesn't go to any first responder. It's just internal to your home, and it's a chime, or if you want to step it up, there's a second alarm, which is a much higher pitched sound. But those are fantastic. They're an amazing, red flag. Oh my God, why is my door open and where's my child? So I've got them on every single external door that leads, like the garage door, the outside door, every single door that leads to the outside. Those alarms are on there. And then depending on how much you want to, like how elaborate you want to go, you can either do deadbolts, the chains. I've actually got an electronic door lock. So I went out to Home Depot, bought one of those that it's like a touch keypad that you need to put in a code. It's actually meant to be outside, so you don't need a key to come into your house, and we reversed it. So it's inside. We use a deadbolt to make sure that nobody comes into the house for security reasons, but anybody who's leaving the house has to put in a code. And of course, everybody but Joshua knows that code. And then we've never had an issue with Joshua ever escaping because he doesn't know the code. He can't get out. And the fantastic thing about it is it's almost within seconds. So you open the door, you close the door, and within seconds it instantly locked. So it's quite airproof, if you will.
It's amazing.
But that's extreme. It's not super expensive. You're looking about $150, but you can go right down to a much lower cost. But definitely make sure all your doors and windows are somehow protected from your child being able to open them, because they, not all, it is a spectrum, but a lot of the kiddos do have wandering tendencies, and you do need to avoid them escaping when they're not with you.
You also say to secure furniture.
So a lot of the kiddos, they go through the same level of curiosity that your regular developing child would go through. Only the thing is, some of them have a little bit of a slower delay, or they're in that stage longer. So climbing furniture, climbing to get to whatever, or getting to TVs and touching them. Like Joshua still to this day wants to touch Barney right on the TV. You want to prevent furniture from falling on the child, and it's like one of the #1 causes. And I don't remember all the statistics off heart, but it's quite scary how many children go to the hospital with injuries or deaths from TVs falling on them. So whatever furniture you can secure, great, do that. There's furniture straps, there's television straps that you can purchase, very economical, at a home hardware store. But at the same token, whatever furniture you can remove from, like, your child's room or even in the main living space, or rearrange, for sure, definitely do that. Like for me, Joshua would try to climb his dresser drawers. So I removed it. I put it inside his closet, closed the door, done deal, out of sight, out of mind. You put a lock on that door, and he couldn't climb it anymore. So, and of course we don't have any side tables. Might not look as pretty. We have a coffee table. We don't have side tables because he likes to run around and climb over the couch from the other side that he's not supposed to. So why add dangers unnecessarily? But that's the one recommendation for sure, because like I said, he's 11, he just turned 12, but he's still doing all the climbing and running around and jumping that a typical maybe 5-6-year-old would do. So they're in that stage a little longer. So you want to protect them, especially.
I'm sorry. And then another tip that you have is to use visual aids and signs to teach. We love this tip.
Correct. So actually, one of the things I actually have in the kit are 2 laminated stop signs. Fantastic for kiddos who are nonverbal and are visual learners, like my son. You put that stop sign on a door or a window. Actually, any visuals really of dangerous items or visuals, period, is a big help to kids that are on the spectrum, can't verbalize, or are a visual learner. It's for sure the best way as an additive to prevent them from any type of injury or harm. The other couple things that I had on a different article was a GPS. Personally, for a flight risk or a child who's nonverbal, GPS is the best thing you can have. It's the peace of mind that I never thought I'd ever have until I bought an Angel Sense GPS. I actually worked with Angel Sense because I love the product so much. I actually have a $50 coupon in the safety kits for parents, because I'm an advocate of making sure you have the ability to find out where your child is who's nonverbal within a matter of minutes. I met a parent, which actually is the reason why it sparked the kits themselves, is I met a parent here in Michigan who actually had a child escape from their home. And within the half an hour time period that they called the police, that child had been hit by a car and passed away. So it was a huge impact. I mean, because I couldn't even imagine that pain that parent was going through, and is probably still going through to this day, and it's been many, many, many years. So to prevent, I mean, I've got that GPS on Josh the moment he wakes up till the time he's in his bath, and it's just nice to know if anything were to happen, a door was to open and somebody left it open, I can find him within a foot of where his location is.
It's all of these tips are amazing. Give your website again, Natasha.
So www.autismmomsnosafety.com, or just recently amks.life.
Fabulous.
Okay.
Well, you are, Carrie Mallory Thompson is right. You are a rock star. This is all amazing information.
Very important information for parents.
And we hope that people will ask for the safety kit. We hope that people, if they know organizations that want to partner with you, will get in touch with you to do that. And definitely to check out your books because they're amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Have a
So
great
happy.
week.
Natasha.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a great week, guys.
You too. We're going to take a
Thanks,
short break, and then we have a ton of questions that have come in today
Okay.
that we want to get to. So
Okay, great.
Stick with us. We're going to be right back to try to answer some of your questions rapid fire. Parent to parent, you might be asking yourself sometimes, why does my child have meltdowns? Well, the difference between tantrums and meltdowns, they're a part of typical development, but meltdowns are when things get a little bit more out of control, when even the child isn't sure what's entirely wrong. Generally with a meltdown, there's an environmental component. There's something else going on outside the child that's making the tantrum worse. It's really important that we start to be detectives and take notes and look around at the environment and start to figure out what are the things that happen every time your child has a meltdown. And lastly, it's important to get help. You really can't face these kinds of things effectively completely on your own. Tantrums, they're a part of typical development, but don't accept meltdowns as something that just happens. Make sure you get help and support. You might be asking yourself if your child has autism.
Hi, I decided to start Autism Works Now as a small business because 90% of individuals with autism and related disabilities are not employed after graduating from high school. Our mission at Autism Works Now is to create job opportunities for spectrum youth and kids through awareness and education.
We're
Welcome back. And we have a lot of questions that
You
we
had
want to
some
get
questions
to.
that came in.
Okay. The first, earlier in the hour, a mom had written in the last hour, talking about a card location that is treating their child. And she said they want to create a tantrum. They want to make them uncomfortable and create a tantrum. And I wrote back a lengthy, like a novel.
Okay.
So I want you to check that and see. It's really easy to get upside down because the way ABA looks at things is so different from how we're used to, right?
Yes, it's so different
And I
than
always-
your natural instinct as a parent.
Yes, and I always say that a natural instinct as a parent, that if you know that your child has a tantrum, when, like for instance, the tantrum that Jem would have, if we got a helium-filled balloon, he would be like, because he would be so afraid that it was
Right.
going to be let go. He
Yeah.
would be like completely. So our response was, we don't go anywhere where there's helium-filled balloons.
Right.
And to me, that still makes rational sense. Like I still understand why my thought process was, well, we'll just cut that out of our lives. We just are never going anywhere with helium balloons again. And if we'd be like at Disneyland and he would, the guy with the helium balloons, we would like scurry him someplace else. And I thought that that was normal behavior. But when your whole life becomes these little pieces of things that
you're afraid of,
because you're stepping around all these things,
Right.
you forget, you don't realize how much your life is diminishing.
Yes,
right?
and you're not exposing your child to the things that they need to be exposed to in the world.
Well, but you think you're doing it because it makes sense. What CARD and what ABA says, ABA, the whole purpose of ABA is to do two things: to increase skills. So when you want to teach something that is valuable to somebody, you use ABA to do that. And when somebody's engaged in a behavior that isn't helping them to get to goals, you want to decrease or eliminate that behavior. That's all ABA is, those two things. So what CARD needs to do when there's a behavior, and the example that I used on the novelette that I wrote on Facebook is, you know, for instance, your child has a tantrum when you drive a certain way to school because they want to drive the correct way, right? They have a flexibility issue. And but that's not really functional, because at some point somebody might have to drive them down that road. Maybe there's construction or they have to go to a different school or whatever. So CARD, the first thing that they have to do, any good ABA provider, the first thing they have to do is observe the behavior. They have to, it's just like when you take your car to the dealership and you say it's, you know, it's making a funny noise. They don't just start ripping things out. They got to drive the car a little bit to see it make the noise, right? So the first thing that CARD is going to do is they're, you know, as long as they can make sure that the child is safe, and that's a big asterisk there, they're going to put the child in the circumstance with somebody there to observe and see exactly all the things that are going on, so that they know why is the child reacting this way? What is causing, like, are they freaking out because of the trees on that street? Or are they freaking out because inside they're scared that you're going to take them to the vet's office? You know, whatever. They need to have eyes on it.
So what's the function of the behavior?
Exactly, the function of the behavior. So they've got to put them through it to see it. Once they see it and they've taken the data, then they come up with a plan. And part of the plan is going to be to teach them skills to help cope with. So if it's anxiety about the trees, they're not going to take them down that street. They're going to take them to look at trees, and they're going to show them trees and do all these things. You know, depending on what it is, there are 1,000 different ways, but they got to know what it is first. Eventually, they're going to take and put them back in the circumstance, but they're never going to throw them in without help or support. There'll be somebody there to say, you know, let's use our skills where we breathe when we're feeling this way. Let's use our words, those kinds of things. So it is never that the CARD just wants to make
cause
your
a
child
tantrum.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I mean, I guess you could get to that. They need to look at it.
Yeah.
So they're going to put them in the circumstance. When the therapist said to me, we're going to go get a bunch of helium balloons and we're going to teach them things.
You were looking forward to that.
And we're going to eventually let them go. And I was like, somebody kill me now.
Right.
I would rather. But you know what? The truth is, I wanted my child to grow. I want him to be able to be at Disneyland and see the balloons. And I can tell you, he's almost 15 years old, and we go to Disneyland, and helium balloons are not an issue. Right? That obstacle got taken away, and we had one afternoon that was a little bit uncomfortable. But what I compared it to on Facebook in my novelette was when our kids are learning to walk. This is always the example I give autism parents, because I know what it feels like. You don't want to deliberately have your child feel uncomfortable. Who signs up for that? But we do. We all do. Because when our child started to walk, they would trip and they would fall, and sometimes they'd hit their head on the coffee table. And never once do we say, enough. That's it. We're not doing this anymore. This upsets him, and we're not doing this. Get a wheelchair. And the reason why we don't is because we know it's a growth thing, and that they're going to get through it, and that this fuss is worth it for them to get there.
To the long run.
We don't know that as autism parents, and we don't know that that ABA is going to get us there. So Nancy and I are going to tell you, and if you want to talk to my kid, you can. I'll set it up. But you need to work with your team. Tell them what you're feeling. Say, it feels like you're torturing him. Let them talk to you about what they're doing and how they're doing it in a controlled manner. They're not trying to torture your child. I guarantee you.
Right.
All right. So check out what I wrote on Facebook.
Questions?
Yes, there's tons of questions. Okay. Casey wants to know how do you get help with funding for services? Our insurance is awful and will do nothing towards ABA and total combined therapy, 60 visits. My son is 3 and level 2 ASD. Well,
what state is she writing from? Does
that's
it say?
What we don't know. But it's
regional center, of course, is the first.
Yes, if you're in California or New York, there are state services that will help you. Same thing. There are some state services in Texas and some now in Utah. But you can go, depending on which state you're in, you can, because you probably have insurance that's self-funded. So it's not really insurance. That's a whole other discussion. But it looks like insurance, but it's self-funded by your company. So it's not government or state regulated. You can go to your state exchange and buy different insurance. So I just want to empower you with that knowledge. You can apply for grants, but you're never going to get enough grant money to pay for ABA. You'll get enough for a copay.
Maybe.
So the thing that you've got to do is lobby your insurance company, look at your state to see if you can get a different insurance. Look and see if your state provides, because in states that don't have mandates, a lot of times they have something that will cover 60 visits is not going to be enough. If you have to, then you're going to move to doing it yourself. And that's hard. I'm not going to candy coat that. But you've got skillsforautism.com. It has the curriculum. And you can do ibehavioraltraining.com to train yourself to how to do it. Don't let anything get in your way, and you can email me if you want to give me more specifics so that we can figure out what's available to you in your state. Deborah says, I had a diagnosis done by 2 doctors. However, our school tested him and said that he has ADHD and doesn't have autism. Isn't it nice that the school psychologist is so empowered
It's
to
more
decide
empowered
that?
than the doctors, right?
Okay, and she says, should I have him retested since these updates? And I would say to you, if you already have 2 doctors that gave you a diagnosis and little old school psychologist says, I would go up against, I would take your 2 and say, let's chat. Because that's not going to work.
Yeah,
2
have
to
an
1,
IEP.
Sorry.
Where you bring in that information.
And you might need to get an advocate or go to COPA.org, COPAA.org.
What does that stand for, Shannon? Do you know, or I'm asking you a question?
Yeah, I wish I knew. But it's all the attorneys that deal with special needs.
Okay.
So it's like a clearinghouse. You can find your state and find a good attorney. We'll ask Bonnie tomorrow to tell us what it actually stands for. But you're probably going to have to fight with them, but tell them, no, I'm sorry. I have 2 diagnoses that say that he has autism. Write to me if you want more help with that. Then somebody wrote in on the live feature and said, can you please help me get started with ideas on how to teach my 3-year-old son to play appropriately with toys? He just dumps them on the floor and runs around. His preschool says he doesn't play with toys the right way or with other kids and usually just walks around the room and thank you. Okay, we've done a bunch of shows on play, and if you go on our YouTube site and you put in, here are the terms, and they should come up. One is functional pretend play, and I've done lots of segments on that. That's the first thing that you want to teach. Then there's, because we're running out of time, I'm gonna have some timers. But they're all in skills too, skillsforautism.com. And it's FOR, not the number 4, skillsforautism. All the lessons are there, but there's a progression. You want to start with functional pretend play, then you go to imaginative play, and then you go, there's sociodramatic play, and what's the one that I'm forgetting? That's going to drive me crazy. But in any case, there's a progression, and you have to model the behavior. So in the beginning, you go and you get little matchbox cars or whatever the child is interested in, and you take the car and he wants to line them up right, but you go vroom, vroom, and then you get them, and you crash into his cars, and you put his hand on the car, and you make the noise, and you make little roads and do things, and you're teaching him how to play. Later on, you're going to get something like a phone and use it and make car noises to teach them that, the rules can be bent, and this can be whatever I want it to be. And then later on, you're going to be completely imaginative and pretend that there's no car. So the symbolic play, that's the other one I couldn't remember.
Symbolic play, okay.
And then you do the sociodramatic play where you dress up in the clothes and you pretend to be somebody else. And then there's a whole bunch, there's block play, there's building and construction play, there's arts and crafts play. They're all the lessons are in Skills for Autism. But you've got to do them. And so often parents go, well, we're focused right now on speech. And I so get that. But if you take the time to teach the play, your child will have less stress. You can teach the speech through the play, and your child will be better off socially. Don't leave the play portion out. Don't just let it go. I'm sorry that your preschool doesn't know how to teach it, but you will be able to teach all of it with skills and with the many videos. I love play, and every time we feature a toy, I talk about how to use it with the child. So we have tons of videos on our YouTube for you to check out. I have gone past the time,
Yes,
and
we're out of
Samantha
time,
is
but
getting
those were
ready for a
good
hook.
answers. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you. So anyway, tomorrow on the show, we have one of my favorite people on. We always have card experts on the show. We have one of my favorite card experts on the show. Veronica Hinosa is remarkable, you guys. She's going to be on the show. Bonnie Yates is going to be answering some of your legal questions. And then we have Carrie Mallory Thompson, who is absolutely amazing. She's coming to us. And now, Carrie, I'm going to mess it all up now. It's from AZA Now. Okay, that part I know, but it's Arizona Autism, and it's for the West Side, but I don't know what the NO stands for.
Okay.
She'll tell us tomorrow. But Carrie has been with us from the beginning
What's
of
she
doing
gonna be
the
talking
show.
about?
So she's going to talk about some of the things that AZA Now are doing, and she'll share a little bit about what's up with her son, who is one of the cutest, sweetest, dearest people on the face of the planet. I love him with my whole being. Yes. I like them a lot. But anyway, so she's going to be here tomorrow. It's always a treat when we can have her to be with us. So that's all happening tomorrow. And don't forget, Fullerton Cares, Mardi Gras for Autism.
this
If
weekend,
you are-
right?
On Saturday. It's
Okay.
I think it's from 11 to 4. We will be there all day.
Okay.
And it will be so much fun. All right, so all that coming up. Don't go away, but we're going to say goodbye for now.
Goodbye
Give
for
your
now.
kiddos a hug from me.
And yourselves a hug from me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.